never join a startup and angel, community.
Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have this next founder of Australiance, a company that supports international innovative companies and professionals in realizing their potential in the Asia, Pacific, and Europe regions. He has over 18 years of business experience in strategy, business development, people management, project management, change management, business process improvement, and financial audit engagement. So you think you should listen to this podcast? You bet your ass you should. This man is currently advising international businesses and professionals who want to enter the Australian market and coaching them through their journey. He is also the co-founder of Startup and Angels, an online platform and networking event series connecting international entrepreneurs and investors. He is actively involved in the French Australian community and holds positions in various organizations, high-level committees. He is a Master of Science in Management with a focus on entrepreneurship, strategy, and finance. He's an industry expert in the public sectors, private equity markets, biotech startups, and much more. Please welcome my next guest, the one and only Leo Dennis. How you doing today, Leo?
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure.
Man, I am looking forward to this conversation because, like I mentioned in the bio here, you have extensive background in just so many different sectors. And one thing we talked about offline before we jumped into this is, really the Australian market. And one of the reasons why I want to have you on is because most of my audience members are very familiar with the US market. They invest a lot of this stuff, but there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of excitement in, where you kind of gravitate toward with a lot of your deal flow, a lot of your relationships and the Rolodex that you have, Australia, Asia Pacific. But before we dive into all that fun stuff, I wanted to ask you, how did you get involved into this vertical of investing and working with so many amazing business professionals and global relationships?
That's a cool question. So basically, I'd say three things define me. One, I think I was born an entrepreneur. Even though I didn't start my first business when I was 10 or 12. But I really started my my career as an entrepreneur, before joining management firms. Two, I'm a connector. I love just, creating values through connecting people, really, really human-centric. And three, I've always had a very international mindset. So, even though I was born in France, I had the chance, of having a father was a journalist traveling the world and, opening my eyes, taking me to the US actually in 2000 in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, meeting a number of expats at the very beginning or at the end, I should say, to the dot-com bubble. And always had this mindset. So it's only when I was in Australia, early 2010, that, one, I started my business, and two, the startup ecosystem was really, starting to grow, and emerging in Australia, and for the, because of who I am, I really wanted to be, to help, first, and to be part of the movement, starting my first internet venture with Australiance.com.
Now, when you're looking at the evolution, because you were at the forefront, you're at the start, and I would imagine it has evolved drastically, right, in a positive direction. Just kind of help me, like, if you could analyze, from the last, 10, 15, some years, okay, and you look at that timeline and the evolution of it, what were some big takeaways? Why do you think it evolved positively? Why do you think it obviously really had this amazing thing? And why do you think it just kind of started with that kind of thesis? And then as well as how some of your global relationships help facilitate that environment even more so?
So, first I would say, Australia is still a very young country, and therefore, quite open to innovation and quite open to disruption. So, when you think about innovation, you need to have this appetite to say, to grab it, and to make the most of it. So, that was a pretty fertile environment for Australia. Two, because it's a very cosmopolitan workforce, with a number of top brains coming from India, China, Europe, all over the world, and the US, even though there are not that many American citizens in proportion coming to Australia. Then you've got a number of brains who can make it happen. Who all bring skills and expertise. And I would say then the third thing is money. It's still per inhabitants pretty rich country, and very open for business, very easy and safe to do business. So you've got here like a great recipe to try things, and make it happen. And there are some huge success. Probably the most famous success for Australian unicorn would be Atlassian, or more recently Canva, coming out of Australia, and kind of we've got no really global footprint.
Let me ask you this in regards to your investor base and LPs. I was talking to someone over in UAE, and they were mentioning kind of the evolution where a lot of the UAE, oil money, they deployed a lot of capital in the West, and then they started realizing, well, we want to kind of build things, startups, founders, investing into your own region, which makes sense, of course, right? Deploying and keeping the money back at home, so obviously it facilitates a good environment for everybody and everything. Is that also kind of what you have seen in regards to the trend with Australia, where a lot of the LPs, a lot of investors, they were deploying capital outside of Australia, and then they started kind of pivoting back to, hey, we want to obviously face, and deploy capital right back into our region and build this nation even further. Well, what did that trend look like?
My take out of that, it's quite different. So in Australia, there's the concept of superannuation funds, so basically retirement money, and so therefore, a percentage at the moment, it's 11% of your gross salary goes to your pension fund, if you want, and that money has always been invested into the Australian economy. Saying that it's only recently that these superannuation funds have been looking at startups and innovation. Okay, so originally the investor scene was quite weak in Australia. Even back in early 2010, we didn't really have a proper VC fund. So actually, what was happened is companies were starting in Australia and pretty quickly coming to the US to raise money. Or doing the Y Combinator, and we've got quite a number of Australian startup and scale-ups who came out of Y Combinator, and VC fund, US VC funds have been are still quite active, partnering with local VC company. So that's one of the aspects. Two, then there is actually a lot of foreign investor money, coming to Australia, because it's a safe market, especially until a few years ago, there was quite a lot of money coming, from China, actually, and people, or Hong Kong, people kind of taking their money out of China and investing in Australia, whether that's, in the property market, stock market, farms, or even startups.
Okay, so that was kind of the evolution of it, and you saw that in a lot of external, and that's why obviously having the global relationships you have, being able to bring and funnel money back into Australia and so forth. You mentioned Canva and some other companies, and this is what I always found interesting is, the global initiative of a lot of these startups. So, again, like I was talking to someone in Israel, they built a founding company in Tel Aviv, but then they really expanded it globally to hit the West, United States. And then that's where they really were able to hit mass market and scale to that $1 billion, $2 billion valuation and valuation, so forth. Is that what you see as well in regards, like when you're investing into the startup in Australia, and that's kind of like the timeline or like one of the phases that you anticipate and say, hey, how are we going to get this integrated over, with your global relationships, how are we going to hit it in Europe? How are we going to hit it and expand it over to other places? Because, Australia, you can hit mass market pretty quickly because of population. And then obviously you want to expand, outside of that in global markets. What does that phase look like? And what is that expectation, that timeline?
Depends. The short answer, depends. But basically, yeah, you're right. So it's, I would say Israel is still, probably the startup nation, like the unicorn factory. So definitely, Australia wouldn't punch in the same category. Saying that, we've seen, a number of companies or unicorns coming from Israel, and being pretty aggressive, and actually looking at Australia pretty quickly, or as a separate strategy to the US, for example, because it's a market that is, generally less competitive than the US. So you get less competition, you've got great talents, it's safe of doing business, and the cost to enter is way lower than the US. And if you fuck up in Australia, no one will know. If you fuck up in the US, there is a good chance that you lost your chance. So it's actually a great market for foreign startups. It's a great market to test things out. And even it's little known, I think, in the US, but actually Uber is testing a number of their features in the Australian market before bringing them back to the US. Very, very digital market. So now talking about, the expansion of Australian business is correct. I mean, depends of, obviously what you do, whether you B2C, B2B, focusing on enterprise or mid-market companies. But, because it's, native English market, because, some of the dynamics are quite similar to, other Anglo-Saxon market, whether the UK, the US, Canada, pretty quickly, companies would, once they found their product to market fit, in Australia, by extension, they would do New Zealand, and then pretty quickly look at, US, either directly, either through a partnership. Okay, and the connections are, quite already. There are a number of lending expedition to the US. Originally Silicon Valley. No, we talk a lot about Texas, obviously New York and the like. But depending on the vertical you are in, if you are in agtech, for example, you would look at other states, as your first gate to the US. But so the time would vary. One of the companies we've helped pretty early days, we were actually sharing offices, and big shout out to them, Wisply. They actually they went pretty quickly to the US. They started to sell in Australia, and then they did Y Combinator. So basically, had raised their seed money with American VCs, established an office in Boston, Paris, Sydney, and that those were they're pretty much their three offices, and they're doing fantastically well. But the US has always been, probably one of the most difficult market for them to maintain, in terms of costs. And then, if you follow tech, there's quite a high turnover, within the staff, like, one of the latest stat I had about the US was, in tech, the tenure for a sales or a developer, would be as low as 6 to 8 months. Whereas, in Australia, and being in the talent acquisition business, and, it's tough. But, I would say there is a longer tenure, and, yeah, I would say staff in general would be a bit more faithful, and being there for the longer run.
Wow, that is really, really good synopsis. And yes, you are hitting those phases. It is contextual depending upon obviously their timeline, what that looks like. And I've seen a lot of larger companies, like you mentioned, do some beta testing in Australia and then gather that data to obviously roll out whatever that feature is, whatever that product is in the United States, and vice versa. Now, I want to get into a little micro with that strategic play and those tactics when they are going to market here in the US. Because just like you mentioned briefly, is, obviously you have, capital expenditures, right? You have to hire a team, you have to, the legal stuff, you have to go and apply. And again, I do understand it is contextual. So if you have a technical company and they're looking to deploy, their product and service here in the US, I would imagine you probably work very closely in regards to helping them strategize and think about that. Or do you guys, partner with a lot of global initiatives like Y Combinator or other VCs in the U.S. that can help them integrate their product and service into the U.S. market? What does that? I know again it's contextual, but if you could maybe
Yeah.
share like a story or a startup, founder that you've worked with very closely and said, hey, you guys hit that moat and product market fit in Australia. Cool. You guys were ready. You were at that phase of deploying in the West. And then what did that look like, strategically to ensure that obviously the whole company wouldn't go belly up? You still need obviously to anticipate certain, uncertain waters, if you will, but also really expanding in that market. If you could just talk a little bit about, and you don't have to mention the name of the company or anything, but I'd
Yeah.
love for you to just share, a story of what that looked like.
So basically, of an Australian startup going to the US, yeah, or the other way around.
No, yes, correct. So Australia, they hit it, and then they start looking at strategically. Hey, what does that plan look like
Yeah.
tactically to ensure that they're obviously optimizing it? Are they collaborating with other VCs in co-collaboration to ensure that there's most success? Or Y Combinator? I know that's obviously a really good
Yeah.
baseline to bridge that gap. So yeah, but I'd love for you to dive into that.
Yeah. So I mean, so typically, I mean, if I talk about early stage startups, generally your advice and the good old advice is like don't go and start setting up and engaging capital expenditure if you don't already have clients. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, but then how do you get those first clients? Then talking about go to market strategy. In the past, you would, probably try to get a grant. And Austrade is, pretty generous with that, saying that you need to, apply, wait, spend the money, and hopefully get the grant 12 months later. But that would be definitely worth, paying a visit, and preparing your journey. So if you want to bootstrap all this, you just book your tickets. Try to network with as many people as possible. Do a number of qualitative interviews. Try to do as many demos as possible, and then get the feedback. Where people would say in the US, I don't know, we've got much better, for much cheaper, not interested, or you see if you've got traction. So one way is to kind of go direct and go according to your need. Another way is potentially to try to find a business representative, whether that's an outsourced sales, a consultant, someone who already has a network in your industry, and who could pretty quickly, over 1 to 3 months, speak to as many people as possible, and if he's done his first sale, then amazing. Then you probably got your first agent, yeah, or your first employee potentially, or you continue in that setup where he's selling the product for you. Another way, is could be to form strategic partnership. So for us, we've helped a French American unicorn called Aircall in Australia. So coming from, they already had probably 200 people in the US, in New York, and 150, 200 people in Paris, in France, when we helped them in Australia. And they already had a number of clients thanks to a strategic partnership. So in particular, they were on the Salesforce App Exchange. They also integrated with HubSpot. So basically,
Nice.
through a strategic partnership, they already, could validate their product market fit. So they were okay. We already have 500 clients in Australia without spending a dime. No, our problem is to keep them and grow them. So to keep them, we probably need someone on the ground to speak to them. Because those bloody Australians, they live on the other side of the world. With a 10-hour time difference with our French market, which is the closest market. So whenever they've got a question, we are sleeping. Okay, so what do we do about that? And that's when we help them kind of build, sales presence, customer success presence, support presence, and then local marketing function and all this. So
Okay.
If I reverse engineer that, in terms of go to market, do I want to go direct? Do I want to go through partners? Do I actually wait to see if there's any traction, or for the US market or Europe market, I go and see investor and say, hey, I've got this great product working in another part of the world. Um, to enter the market, I see, or I think there is traction. Can we do a GV, or if you invest in my company, this is what I would achieve in the US. Another way, when you have money, could be to actually acquire a zombie, like a startup that is not functioning so well because maybe your technology is better than their technology, but they already have a first base of clients, in the US or in another part of the world, and Uber in Australia. That's what they've done. They bought a company called Car Next Door, and they integrated it into the Australian Uber app. And now I'm in France, I don't see that functionality. But in Australia, I can actually rent my neighbor's car for 2 hours if it's available for 2 hours, or for 3 days. If he's on vacation, and bring it back and pay through Uber.
So it is very, I mean, at this point, when they're looking at expanding globally over to the US or other markets, right, whatever it is, from the blank, they are at, kind of mass scale already in Australia, or they've hit kind of saturation, and then they're looking at strategically. And obviously, like you mentioned, there are certain beta plays to be able to say, hey, where's the heartbeat? Before we go full throttle, 100% on that, it's, hey, let's go in there and find these individuals. We want to have some sort of preliminary clients already established. So when we do go take a full presence, it's, rock and roll. And I think about it almost like a restaurant biz, right? You always have when you open up a restaurant, there's always a soft open, get a kind of feel, get the systems, get the, all the kinks worked out. And then there's a mass, open, of course. And that's where all of a sudden that happens. And then you're really, taking off, which totally makes sense contextually. I was just curious, strategically, what does that look like? And it's obviously very tactical in the way you do it. Now, I want to talk about something as well, because whenever you're scaling a business to, unicorn style, billion-dollar valuated company and forward, there's always not only product development, but also, talent acquisition, right? You got to have really good talent. And you mentioned, actually, and this has kind of caught me off guard, where, because of Australia and the amazing economy you guys have, you guys actually have a hard time a little bit in finding really amazing talent. It's not that you guys don't have it, it's just that they're already employed. So it's a very, very supply and demand in that situation. So you're really fighting for some of the best talent, which makes sense. So with that being said, because everybody's kind of gone online and everything's kind of open up, where it's, now you have crowdsourcing, where you have access to a larger pool of talent, right? Internationally, globally. How has that helped really be able to scale these startups in Australia now that the talent pool has increased drastically?
So very, very good question. And, I think, obviously, when COVID hit and, we all went into remote working, and remember, maybe one interesting fact in Australia that you guys are not necessarily across is the country, the borders were closed for almost 2 years. Okay, so you, Chris, you couldn't have visited me between March 2020 until mid-Feb 2022. Okay, so which means no new talents were entering the market, no international students, nothing. Okay, so originally, obviously there was this thinking that, everyone would go offshore. Our organization, we actually partnered with the like of Globalization Partner, Deal, to be able to actually, hire the same talent we were before that relocating to Australia, wherever they were. Okay, and for some roles it worked. For some roles, we had roles like EA, data analyst, developers, obviously, in Philippines, Indonesia, India, of course, and or for some companies still it didn't really work out if they didn't know them beforehand, if they didn't have that trust or this use to work with them. So whenever they could, they went back into, okay, we'll have this hybrid way of working. Also Australia is quite special in the sense that it's in a bloody time zone, awkward time zone for a number of countries. So even when you work with India, you've got like 5 hours and a half time difference, which is quite large, for myself, for company, we know spread on 3 continents, and because we come together, at least 3-4 times a year, and we can adjust things, then we can all go back, in our own time zone, and and it's running most of the time. It's running beautifully, because your company is then working 24 hours a day. But it took a while, and for a number of companies where, let's say, less international or kind of centered on the Australian market, that adjustment didn't really work out. Also culturally, I think if you're not in the market, and you're trying to sell in that market, it's like anywhere. Like currently in France, you ask me to sell in a company in Seattle. I don't know the weather. I don't know the name of the streets. I don't know, what's making the news that day. I can fake it for, few meetings. But, at the end of the day, say, okay, trying to sell me an American product or American services, with your French accent, and you don't know where I am. So for some tasks, some roles, some companies, I think, it didn't really work out. It's always, I would say it was a mixed experience, or for other companies, they now have their tech teams all across the world. In the US, we've got a client, they're about 50, and they don't even have a head office. They're all working all over the world, a workforce. It's a Australian company we helped back in 2017 to enter the European market. That's part of their culture, So once a year, they meet in one of the city where someone lives, and, they get to spend time together. They've got, very, very strong company values. They all kind of outdoor people, and it worked beautifully. But they were set up that way, kind of day one. That was part of their DNA.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of companies now, because everybody's been pushed on it. It's been like a fight. Are we going back in office, or are we all staying remote? And obviously, we see kind of positive and negative for both ends. And that's why I was just curious in regards to just when you're building a company. You mentioned earlier on offline that the talent, right, and the supply and demand of it, and trying to find really good talent. And so now, because of that, it's kind of a mixed bag, is what you're basically saying. Yes, you have access to it, but also the time zone, because where Australia's at, and so forth. So yeah, you can probably get access to it, but they have to work on you guys' time, and then that kind of obviously puts a little dwindle in it as well. I was consulting for one company, and they've got numerous individuals, high caliber, like digital marketers and all that fun stuff in India, and they're based on the West Coast and in the U.S. And so it's just very interesting to see how it has really helped drastically getting just access to really amazing talented people for maybe pennies on the dollar, or really high level content and so forth. So I want to ask you also, you focus on in this in the United States, there are different regions where they really focus on different, verticals. Obviously, in the, San Fran, you have like deep tech, a lot of the fun stuff, a lot of techs, AI, all that fun stuff, right? Then also in Miami, Florida, you focus kind of on different kind of alternatives, ESG. That's kind of very, that's where that hub is at, if you will. And then you have different, up in the West in Washington State, you have biotech, and that's kind of where the hub's at, where a lot of investors and a lot of VCs are based. So my point is there's geographics, right? My here in the West, that you kind of gravitate toward. My question is, Australia, there's so many different verticals. Is there one vertical outside of others that you found like you guys are really known for, or you guys really are investing a lot of your energy, time, effort into it. And what I mean by that is, in the West, I'm noticing a trend, a lot of family offices, a lot of institutional investors deploying a lot of capital in ESG. And that could be just different, solar panels, all sorts of different fun, different things. And I've seen all sorts of crazy deal flow. But ESG is the craze. Obviously, we got AI and machine learning, generative AI and so forth. But ESG long term has been kind of a trend, upticking. I didn't know if you saw that as well in Australia, or are you still seeing a lot of money being deployed in, deep tech or biotech, or just kind of the tech umbrella, if you will?
Mm. So yeah, very very interesting question. So I would say, interestingly, quite recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Paris for Vivatech. Okay, so which
Oh,
is
nice.
which was huge, really really huge, and half, I'd say at least half of the startups, but also the enterprise, showing the innovation was about climate change. Okay. Um, and almost horizontally there was this AI. Obviously AI was, especially Elon Musk was there. There is obviously OpenAI. At the moment, looking at where they're gonna put the head office in Europe. There's this whole discussion about regulation and all this. So those were really the two key buzzwords: climate change and AI. Okay. In Australia, we've got those themes as well. But I would say on the climate change or ESG scene, we are a bit follower, unfortunately, because the way, it's most of the wealth, or still the number one, economy pillar is mining. So yeah, Australia has been known for digging stuff. It's literally a huge mine full of resource, and I'm not gonna go into politics or government, but obviously that was not the key focus of looking at renewable energy for quite a while. So now it's catching up. It's really really catching up. So which is the good thing, and there are some local initiatives. My fear is, or that's probably not where I would put a dollar in terms of saying the next Australian unicorn would be a green tech. Hopefully I won't be. Hopefully I won't be wrong, and you won't sending me that podcast. In a couple of years time, saying Leo, you broke your crystal ball. Um, Europe. Whether that's France or Germany, that's probably where I'd put my bet on. Because now you see it's kind of really embedded into kind of any um, government initiatives or large group initiatives. Is everything is kind of centered about ESG. Not necessarily about my turnover growth, but it's like what's it's gonna do in terms of my impact. Another theme that I think is coming up, and probably for me to really resonate, is about anything to do with mental health. Whether that's for, especially for female, the femtech, is or applied to founders, or in the tech sector, people have been stressed for whatever reason, and or you can prevent burnout. So yeah, so basically, how we measure and how we prevent having a negative impact on people's mental health, or health in general. So in Australia, in terms of or where are the center of excellence, there is one thing that is not very well known, to the general public outside of Australia, is South Australia. So the capital city is Adelaide, where they're really pushing on smart manufacturing. So they're looking at IoT. It's also a great base to for space. So they do. There is actually quite a number of really cool startup in the space sector over there. And so yes, and cyber security as well. It's one of the zones in the world that is, the most isolated. So, great space to potentially put some data center with confidential information, or, base for rockets and things like this. So, it's also that's where actually the submarine, the Australian submarine, were supposed to be produced with the French technology. So there was a lot of interest, of spy and things like this. So they actually invested a lot into cyber security. And then, I'd say, Melbourne, it's in Australia, is the capital of sports. So there is a large sport tech scene. Recently had the joy to actually welcome a delegation of Australian sport tech companies coming for Vivatech and the London Tech Week in Europe recently. And, you see that, with, a number of the Rugby World Cup taking place in France, and, next year the Olympics taking place in France, there are a lot of delegation, coming up, and, whether they've got smarter device, or, ticketing system, or, software to manage, clubs, licenses, merchandising, create new revenues for clubs, or even influencer, to help the average, sport person to make a buck out of trying things, or influencing or talking about products they're using. So you see on the sports scene, Melbourne is quite active. Well, that's what I would mention. And then Sydney on the B2B SaaS is definitely pushing the scene in Australia, kind of generic through this horizontal.
So that's interesting. You're seeing when you went to that conference, Vivatech, very well known. It's fun that you went there. So that's really awesome. Where you're talking, of course, ESG was kind of the headline, if you will, talking about climate change and things like that, and how to implement things like that. But you're also saying Australia may not be the leader in that regard, but you are seeing a trend toward that direction in regards to startups or funds or ideas or opportunities. Which is really awesome. And then also kind of running down everything and what you're seeing in regards to all the verticals and what you guys have a really, really strong hold on in talent, as well as ideas and, go to market and products and so forth, which is really, really fun. And I on a side note, I know you bounce back from France to Australia. And France, it is interesting to see what they're doing and really taking, strong, capitalistic kind of moves to attract a lot of money toward that area as well. And it's really, really cool to see kind of the evolution of all these things. I want to talk a little bit about, startups again, coming back down to the start. When you're working with a lot of these individuals, you consult for them, okay, and a lot of different things. Basically, getting, raising capital to all different, go to market, a lot of this stuff, okay. And if you could just look at your, clientele, if you will, and kind of get a heartbeat of what do you notice in regards to the trend that most of them need help with? Are you noticing a specific trend where it's like, okay, hey, they need maybe, the technical advice because most of them love marketer sales, or, are they more of like, hey, they need actually, operations and systems and processes to get this off the ground? Or is it more of just the Rolodex? They just need connections. They need network. They need to know, the people. What are you noticing in regards to like one of the biggest hurdles that these individuals are facing that you obviously can solve that problem relatively quickly, and when you're working with a lot of your clients?
So, I mean, in short, what we are good at and what we can provide is connections. Okay, so I would tell you connections. Okay, so connections with your first clients or your next clients, connection with talent, an expert that can help grow your business, or even an entry level role, because you're working like three people, and or someone in a different regions, that will be able to do that customer success, so you keep your retention and you can build on it. Okay, but actually, for us to be able to do that, we need to get into your head and ask you why. What's the problem? And I think every single business is coming back to what are you solving, and why you think, or why are you the best at solving that problem? And we ask this why a few times until we are convinced, and we feel you, Chris, you are convinced about it as well, and you convince us. Once we have that, then and we are convinced, or we can trust you. And the other thing is the trust, okay? Because yes, we built this amazing network, but the network is built on trust. That I'm not gonna introduce you a crook, a liar. Someone will let you down. Otherwise, I'll be letting you down. Otherwise, you'll turn to us and think, hey, never join a startup and angel, community, an event. Those guys, they'll introduce you the David in your company and or make you lose time. Okay, so I think strategy wise, what we try to do is to understand what has worked in another market, and adapt it for the market, based on the budget of a client. But the key thing is the why. And sometimes maybe in the US, in your region, you're solving a real problem there. Okay, and the way you're solving it, it's the best way at that point of time in this zone. No, is this problem, does it exist? Is it big enough in another country? Maybe it's revolutionary what you do in your country, in your city at that point of time. Maybe no one gives a damn, in another country. The way you solve the problem, whether it's legit or not, it's another thing. Or is that the right way? Will it work with the local culture? Okay. And that's why, Australia is quite fascinating, and, and at first sight looks easy. It's like, okay, but people are very cosmopolitan. There are people from all over the world. I could sell to, if it's working for the Americans in most states, surely it will work with the Americans in Australia, and you'll start selling, and it's amazing. But like, how many are they? Is that a reflection of the market? And and then in France, and they would be even less Americans in France than in Australia. But then how do you go beyond that? How do you adapt your solution? How do you adapt the marketing so it get digested, understood, and people say, yeah, okay, but it's better than the current pill I've got. I'll try this new pill for my problem. So the connection is the whole, but the first thing we need to understand is the why. If we have that, and and we are on your on your team, then we do a fantastic job.
Which makes perfect sense in regards to like the connections, the massive network that you've been able to build in relationships, and really making sure that you're making those alignments, and those synergistic relationships to really expand. And I love what you mentioned, just kind of diverting a little bit, where all these questions you have to ask in strategic and tactical way of deploying that product in international markets, right? Because it may be very successful. And I'm glad you brought this up, because that is something that a lot of founders have to think about. It's like, yeah, you want to hit unicorn stats, but hey, you guys hit saturation in Australia or Europe, but it may not hit for some reason in the US, right? Whatever it may be. And so you kind of just have to pivot and adjust and modify. But that's one of the reasons why I think your feedback loop, where you're not doing it just like, hey, let's just go and let's just make it happen. It's very strategic. You're gathering data. You're doing a lot of beta testing. You're finding strategic relationships, collaborations. And what's interesting to me is you're working with people like you, right? These founders are working with people like you, Leo, that already have those established connections. So it collapses that relationship building a little faster, right? That timeline, because I mean that's in this definitely in this game, it's relationships, and it's like if you were able to connect with Leo, he knows all these people that can get you those enterprise clients in the U.S. or this and that, so you can hit the ground running pretty quickly, or investors, or VC, or whatever it is. So I want to like kind of foot stomp on that because it is the importance of this, right? You could go out there and single handedly call a whole bunch of VCs and enterprise clients, and then just the timeline is way too long. But you want to collapse that timeline definitely as a founder and startup, and you just don't want to spend more time and money, net or resources unnecessarily if you can do it in a faster way and more effective way as well. So I definitely am tracking on this. When you're, I was curious a little bit also. And this is just kind of a side note, but because you're so internationally like well established and you have a lot of global relationships, I had a cool conversation the other day offline with a friend of mine, and we were talking about some really fun stuff in regards to emerging markets. India went from 10 largest economy to the 5 within the last several years. We're also seeing China, of course, that's very well known. We also see US, of course, that's well established. But then we're also seeing the UAE. UAE's really got a lot of oil money, and so they're deploying a lot of different verticals. So a lot of it, and you just mentioned France as well. So a lot of fun activity, things like that. A lot of these nations, a lot of wealthy people, and there's a lot of just global synergistic relationships I'm noticing. Even a lot of VCs here in the U.S. are having specific funds that are in Asia Pacific, or that are investing in those regions. My point is what are you noticing? I'd love to get your perspective. You have a lot of global relationships, synergistic, over the line, nation to nation kind of synergistic, relationships and so forth. What are you noticing? Are you guys really excited about the emerging markets? Do you see it as competition, or do you see it more of like, hey, you know what? How are we going to grow with this? What does that look like for you, and how are you navigating it? What does that overall look like?
Cool. Thanks for asking the question. So I'd say first I'll do a shout out to my co-founder for Startup and Angel, a guy named Axel, also a Frozy, a French Australian, but really a citizen of the world and an adventurer. So no, he's now based in Dubai, but he's spending his most of his days traveling Africa. And we helping him build not only an internet empire, because already he's got an internet empire, but no brick and mortar, and launching in aggressively launching physically into 3 new markets a year. But if we go back in 2016, when we started Startup and Angel, with the idea of really helping entrepreneurs, early stage, completely industry agnostic, giving them an audience and a place once a quarter. We started in Sydney, and bringing together like corporate execs, people who had a bit of spare cash, interested about innovation, and not necessarily willing to quit their 6 to 7 figure job, but potentially if the problem a startup was solving was interesting enough, or they felt like beyond the 10, 50 grand they could invest, they could bring their network, and they would like to spend a bit of time as an advisor for those business. So that's how we started. And originally we started in Sydney. Pretty quickly, because he had this interest already for emerging markets, we run those events in countries like Papua New Guinea. Not even sure where that is, Pacific, which is the largest, one of the largest Pacific islands. We run those events in Cambodia. Our first event in Cambodia would have been back in 2017. That was the largest startup event in Cambodia ever. We had 200 people. We had investors flying from Singapore. We had, a number of people. We had to actually have a translator, because some of the people joining, they were not speaking English. We had press. We made the local newspaper. was quite amazing. People were queuing and all this, and that was back in 2017. In 2017, if you were an entrepreneur, a startup in Cambodia, and you raised $20,000, you were front page of the newspaper. Okay, we've done 7 editions now in Cambodia. No, you probably add 2 zeros to that to make the headlines. We've done events in Vietnam, Singapore. Axel ran a couple of recently events in Ivory Coast, in Nairobi, Kenya. So we know we've been to those emerging markets. We've grown a network there. The valuation, are way, way lower. But those markets, they're doing leapfrog. In Cambodia, people don't even have a laptop. They do everything from their smartphone. Originally when we went there, everything, you had to carry cash everywhere. Now you can do everything cashless. People didn't even have bank account. We started an impact business over there called Book Encore Tuk Tuk, basically with the view to help international travelers to safely book tuk tuk drivers to visit the Angkor temples, and making sure they were using this money to raise their kids properly, sending their kids to school, we were one of the only platform, accepting credit cards. We were even accepting crypto at some point when it was worth something. Those countries are, taking the leapfrog. Africa, I know Axel is very, very big in Africa. I mean, you should have him on one of your next episodes to really focus. He's one of, he probably has over 50 investment now into African startups, a bit from everywhere. At the moment we're leading a project for one of his company headhunting in South Africa, Rwanda, Senegal. So those markets are very, very interesting and changing quickly. The population is growing much faster, than any other part of the world. The infrastructure need to follow, education needs to follow, technology is an amazing way to kind of fast track all this and make sure this population growth is going to be sustainable.
Yeah, and you're saying some really, really powerful things, and I want to reiterate because it is very exciting, right? And I just mentioned India and Asia Pacific, but I mean you're talking even Cambodia and Singapore and all these other ones that, and I think in the U.S. and that's why it's so important to bring it on our podcast and talk about it, discuss it, is because we are just so used to having this baseline that's here. And the reality is some individuals don't even have access to certain things, right? Some people don't have, laptops, for example, but they have access to the internet. And so they, democratizing the information out there. So they have access to it and they're going out there and they got more hurdles in their way, but they, they don't have bank accounts, but they just figure it out, right? They make it happen. And that's why I think it's cool where, like yourself, Leo, that you're taking initiative to, be focused on those areas and find those kind of hidden gems, if you will. I'm having a really cool conversation next week with a family office in Africa, just talking about business deals and deal flow and so forth. And so, again, I'm trying to be more intentional with connections and collaboration, external outside of the U.S. because of what you just mentioned of there's amazing opportunity and just seeing that and what that looks like, but building the relationships because it's like you got to skate to where the puck is. Sometimes it may not be right now, but it's like, hey, it may be 5 years, 7 years when they get that baseline and you're able to really help them scale and so forth and just giving access to, again, the network that you have. Leo, I really appreciate you being on here, man, and just talking all this really, really fun stuff. I mean, just diving into your own story, your own history, but also the evolution of Australia, France, and the synergistic and the global initiatives that you've been able to really, spearhead the incredible opportunity that you have with your startup and angel online platform. Again, just building synergistic relationships and really fueling the fire in a lot of these startups and hitting the $1 billion valuation. And then also talking about strategic initiatives on, global go-to-market strategies, from Australia to US or vice versa, and see how they are very synergistic in beta testing in larger companies and so forth, and even growing through M&A. So it's a very, very interesting time. And I appreciate you being on here. For those that want to reach out to you, that want to have a few more questions, like, hey, I just want to learn a little bit more about what you do, and it sounds very interesting in getting access to maybe some of your people that you connect with, if they qualify and so forth. How do they reach out to you and connect with you, my man?
I mean, the best way, my most active social media account would be LinkedIn. But please, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a little note, just to say why you want to connect. Remember the why. And another great way, I suppose, for entrepreneurs, investors, even people who wants to explore or network of startups. We've got a free membership on startupandangels.com. You can join the community, create a profile, join the community, and learn about upcoming events in 15 different cities. We're not in the US yet, but Christian, if you're interested, or if you know anyone interested to grow the community over there, whether that's through online events, physical events, we're all ears. But yeah, generally joining the community is a great way. If our values, this appetite to improve the world through entrepreneurship resonate with you, come and join us at Startup and Angel. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and let's have a discussion.
Awesome. Make it simple, guys. I put those links in the description so you guys can get access to it. Reach out to him, Leo, also. So I would highly recommend it. Just stop what you're doing and reach out, because you never know. It's one of those things, and definitely in this kind of ecosystem, one relationship opens up another door, which opens up another door, which opens up another door, which then you do business and they write a $40 million check, right? You just never know, or they may be the next client or whatever it might be. And so that's just how this whole thing works, and it's so serendipitous sometimes, and how it all falls. But Leo, I really appreciate you being on here, guys. That is the founder and CEO of Australiance, my friend Leo Dennis. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.